Euro 2024 is the worst tournament of all time. Or at least, that's what I keep hearing said on social media. The football has been boring, the star power sorely lacking, the goals few and far between, and the entertainment almost entirely absent. On the few occasions in which the ball has found the back of the net, invariably, it has been either an own goal or following a dubious penalty awarded after a VAR intervention. The top scorer at this tournament is a certain Mr. Own Goals, with 10 goals, which is 3 times as many as any other player, which surely has to put him in much belated Ballon d'Or contention. There have been more own goals at Euro 2024 than there were in the first 15 editions of the Euros combined. Meanwhile, there have been no fewer than 12 penalties awarded, ahead of the final tonight in Berlin. The outlook is so dire that France boss Didier Deschamps, before his team's exit against Spain, even had to field a question from a Swedish journalist about why France's games had been so boring. HITC Deschamps responded by stating that if the Swedish found France's football to be so boring, then they should watch something else. But the majority of fans would probably side with the journalist from Sweden in his assessment of France's games. France didn't score a single goal themselves from open play in their entire run to the semi-finals, only scoring twice in 5 matches, namely a penalty and an own goal, with Randall Kolo Muani becoming the first and indeed the only France player to score from open play throughout their entire Euros campaign in their semi-final defeat against Spain. In the build-up to that game, Deschamps wasn't the only one to field questions about the quality, or lack thereof, of France's football. Despite being widely perceived as having the most talented squad and team at the tournament, Spanish midfielder Rodri found himself coming to the unlikely defence of the French in his own pre-match press conference, insisting that Spain's upcoming opponents, quote, aren't boring to me. What a ringing endorsement. France aren't alone though. England's football at this tournament, at least prior to the semi-finals, has been described as, and I quote, mind-numbingly tedious and enough to make you want to gouge your own eyes out with a rusty spoon. Portugal attempted to beat France at their own game by boring them to death in the quarterfinals. Unsuccessfully, might I add. They lost on penalties. And Italy might as well not have even turned up to this Euros, putting up about as much fight against a vastly superior Switzerland team in the round of 16 as they did in the East African campaign. So just what on earth is going on? Why can't teams score goals? Where have all of the great players gone? And has Euro 2024 really been as bad as some people are making out? Well, that's what today's video is all about. So sit back, relax, and join me, perhaps for the last time quite literally to Germany, for an in-depth look at whether football has got rubbish and Euro 2024 is the worst thing to happen in Germany since the Second World War debacle, or whether it's just that the wife has left you and she won't let you see the kids anymore. I promise you, that intro will all make sense soon. When contemplating whether Euro 2024 really is a historically terrible tournament or not, we must, of course, compare it to former tournaments. The framing of Euro 2024, if not of recent tournaments as a whole, as being uniquely terrible and historical aberrations that ought to be bemoaned, necessitates the perception, either real or imagined, that tournaments of old were somehow better, whether that be the quality of the football, the entertainment, or indeed both. But how do those perceptions stack up to some scrutiny? Some of the most lionised tournaments, especially ones in which England went on good runs, like Italia 90 or Euro 96, are remembered as being something very different to what they actually were. Italia 90 in particular was a tournament packed full of turgid football and offensive tactics, averaging an all-time low of just 2.1 goals per game, and actually leading to the introduction of both 3, rather than 2 points for a win, and the back pass rule, both as a means of encouraging more attacking and entertaining football. As bad as some of the games may have been, France versus Portugal, I don't think Euro 2024 has been so bad that it is likely to result in the rules of the game being radically redrawn, as Italia 90 did. Finalists Argentina scored just 5 goals all tournament, an all-time record low for finalists, and across the quarterfinals, semi-finals and the final itself, they scored a grand total of, drumroll please, 1 goal. England's much-lauded run to the semis, which immortalised the likes of Paul Gascoigne and manager Bobby Robson, consisted of just 1 win within 90 minutes, across 7 matches, and just 2 goals in their 3 group games. Euro 96, meanwhile, which was the first Euros to feature 3 points for a victory, for the reasons already alluded to in reference to Italia 90, wasn't all that much more exciting. The knockouts in particular were among the most tedious and offensive of all time, with only 9 goals scored across 7 matches, 4 of which were decided by penalty shootouts. Anyone who thinks of or remembers Euro 96 as being some kind of enthralling zenith of the European Championships should probably go back and actually watch the games, as I did during COVID, when they were repeated on free-to-air TV. England drew against Switzerland in a drab game, were fortunate to beat Scotland, and scored 3 goals in 11 minutes to turn an edgy game against the Netherlands into a compelling win. Watching either of those tournaments back, not the highlights but the full games, is the surest way to disprove the notion that football used to be thrilling to watch and has only recently been blighted by boring games. You spend most of them, or at least I did, waiting for the big name players like Gascoigne and Platt to do something spectacular, and outside of quite literally a few moments throughout the entire tournament, you are kept waiting. Oddly enough, Steve McManaman, who was obviously a fantastic player but is rarely talked about as having been one of the stars of Euro 96, is probably the standout player for England when you watch the full games back, but even he is no more impressive than, say, Bukayo Saka at either this Euros or the last. That is not a criticism of him by any means. Saka has been consistently excellent for England. It is just a comment in regard to this Euros in comparison to previous ones. That's not to say that nothing has changed, or that people are wrong to notice certain changes and not to enjoy or be happy about them. They are right, in many respects. And by that, what I mean, of course, is that I agree with them, as we will come on to, but before that, it is just worth asking the question, why are former tournaments lionised in this way and remembered as something that they most assuredly were not? I think that there are a few reasons. One of them is that, as with so many things in life, nostalgia kicks in, and the bad bits, all of the turgid and offensive football, the poor draws and the lack of goals, they get airbrushed from our collective consciousness, and slowly but surely, all that remains is Gazza's volley and dentist chair celebration, Shearer thumping the ball into the back of the Dutch net, and singing It's Coming Home into the early hours at street parties. It doesn't help, or it does help, I suppose, depending on your perspective, that almost no one, unless you are a total weirdo like me, ever actually goes back and watches the games in full. That goes for almost any game. Instead, what we see, time and time again, replayed so many times in fact that they become practically ingrained in our retinas and more deeply implanted in our minds than the names of our own family members, is constant highlight reels and montages, highlighting, as their name suggests, only the best bits of previous tournaments, further entrenching the association between tournaments of old and only their best and most entertaining aspects. I promise you, with enough time, the same thing will happen with Euro 2024. If England beats Spain in the final this evening, do you honestly think that anyone is going to remember the 0-0 ball draw against Slovenia in the group stage? If Kane scores the winning goal in the final, most likely winning himself the Golden Boot in the process, no one will reflect, in 10 or 20 years' time, on the fact that he was quiet for much of the tournament, struggled with and played through a severe back injury, and that there were calls for him to be dropped for either Ivan Toney or Ollie Watkins at almost every juncture. When Euro 2074 comes around, do you really think that the BBC, long ago privatised and now owned by the rotting corpse of Rupert Murdoch, with 90% of its coverage dedicated to transphobia and claiming that we are all much better off without all of the countries that are now underwater, Do you really think that the since renamed Britain's Burning Corporation, in their montage celebrating 50 years since England's historic run to the Euro 2024 final, are going to show 50 clips of Kieran Trippier cutting back inside from left wing-back onto his favoured right foot and passing the ball to Mark Gay or John Stones? No, of course not. They'll show Bellingham's overhead kick, Trent's winning penalty in the shootout against Switzerland, Watkins turning and firing past Bart Verbruggen in the Netherlands net, and, hopefully, some kind of highlight from the final. And, assuming that we are still alive, we'll all go, I remember that. What a great tournament. Football was far better back in those days, before teams were managed solely by artificial intelligence, and the goalkeepers were literal robots. And woke. Well, you know, something along those lines. It's not just a case of football nostalgia or selective amnesia, but nostalgia more broadly. Lots of people yearn for their youth, or at least some kind of bygone era or their romanticised idea of it, which they impose upon the football of that time. Euro 96 was great, not just because of Gazza's goal against Scotland or the 4-1 win against the Netherlands, but because I was young in 1996, fully submerged in Britpop and Cool Britannia culture. I didn't have any dependents, and I spent most of the summer in pubs and beer gardens with a blood alcohol content of 0.25. This isn't me, just to be clear. I was literally 6 months old during Euro 96. I am channeling my inner 50-something-year-old man. I've also now changed my Facebook profile picture to a photograph of my BMW and started sharing memes on there about how it's illegal to say that you like boobs nowadays. If anything, I have taken the method acting far more seriously than I needed to for this segment of the video, but never question my commitment to this channel. In a moment, I will address what I think are actually some pretty legitimate criticisms of Euro 2024 and football in 2024 more broadly, and why I think it is probably reasonable to say that the 2014 World Cup, for example, unlike the 1990 World Cup, again, if you go back and watch the full matches, probably actually was more exciting and fun, if you like, than Euro 2024. But even there, I feel a pang of personal nostalgia kicking in and an overwhelming sense of doubt as to my own perception of that tournament. I was 18 at the time of the 2014 World Cup. I had literally just finished school, which, you know, I was delighted about. I went on a lad's holiday to Malia for the start of the tournament, followed by about 4 weeks living in Portugal. To paint a caricature then, I was young, wild and free. I didn't have a job, I'll be honest. That one really does throw a spanner in the works of having fun. Spoiler alert for any of you who aren't there yet. I spent almost the entire summer in the sun with friends, having a great time, and meeting my now long-term girlfriend. It was, unmistakably, the best summer of my life. The 2014 World Cup was also, unmistakably, pretty entertaining. There was the Netherlands smashing the favourite Spain 4-1 in the group stage, the joy of Colombia and James Rodriguez, the surprise package of Costa Rica, and, of course, Germany's 7-1 annihilation of the host Brazil in the semi-finals, but it would be remiss, and indeed hypocritical of me, to pretend like my personal nostalgia for the summer of 2014 and my life events during that tournament didn't colour my perspective of it. When I think about the 2014 World Cup, I don't think of Argentina's fairly drab run to the final, the tedium of Group H, or even just how useless England truly were. It is a blind spot. We all have them. One of the legitimate criticisms of this Euros, I think, is that it has lacked a bit of star power. Football is a team sport, of course, but international football, more so than the club game, is often defined by its stars. When we think about the 1970 World Cup, invariably, we think about Pelé, 1974, Cruyff, 1978, Kempes, 1982, Paolo Rossi, 1986, Maradona, 1990, Scalacci, 94, Stoichkov, Baggio and Romario, 1998, Ronaldo and Zidane, the list goes on and on. The biggest star at this Euros, Kylian Mbappe, took a whack in France's opening game against Austria in which he broke his nose and was fairly subdued up until France's semi-final defeat against Spain. Meanwhile, a statuesque 39-year-old Cristiano Ronaldo held Portugal back, if anything, more closely resembling his bronze recreation at Madeira Airport than the Ronaldo of Euro 2012 or Euro 2016. Harry Kane, as already alluded to, has been a shadow of his usual self, struggling with a back injury and fatigue. Robert Lewandowski missed Poland's opening game and a half. The Bundesliga Player of the Year, Florian Wirtz, was subdued and outshone for much of the tournament. The Premier League Player of the Year, Phil Foden, was largely ineffective prior to the semis, and there was no dream ending in this tournament for either Toni Kroos or Luka Modric. That is probably a valid, or at least a coherent criticism then, but others are not. At one point, I saw the Netherlands' Cody Gakpo, being the tournament's top scorer, being used as a stick with which to beat Euro 2024, and cited as evidence of just how far our once beautiful game had fallen. Aside from the fact that Gakpo is pretty good, that is why Liverpool paid a potential 50 million euros for him, the idea that every other Euros top scorer has been a household name is total fiction. Patrick Schick was the joint highest scorer at the last Euros, Alan Zagayev was tied for the award at Euro 2012, Milan Baros won it outright with 5 goals at Euro 2004, a tournament which was absolutely littered with superstars. Savo Milosevic was tied for top spot at Euro 2000, and if you want to go even further back than that, at only the second ever Euros, Euro 64, Dejo Novak, a defender who only ever won 9 caps for Hungary, was the joint highest scorer at a Euros finals. Incidentally, Gakpo is now joined by the likes of Harry Kane, Jamal Musiala and Dani Olmo, all tied on 3 goals at Euro 2024 ahead of the final, which is hardly a drop-off in class from the players that I just mentioned. And while geriatric megastars like Ronaldo and Lewandowski, whose combined age of 74 exceeds the retirement age in every country in the world, may not have had the most memorable tournaments, a 16-year-old has been one of the stars of this Euros, which is an amazing story if you think about it. Georgia beat Portugal and made the knockouts in their first ever major tournament, a genuinely astonishing achievement which probably isn't being fully appreciated. And Turkey, in their role as self-appointed co-hosts, turning every ground into a cauldron fit for Istanbul, made it through to the quarterfinals, their second best ever run at a Euros. There have been loads of great games, narratives, and performances at this Euros. It is just a question of whether people have absorbed them and how much weight they have given them, balanced against the less entertaining and compelling matches, which have obviously accompanied them. One of the reasons, I think, why Euro 2024 has been quite so maligned isn't because the standard of football has been poor or it has been a poor spectacle overall, but because specific games, which live long in the memory, have been spectacularly uninteresting. England's group games, for example, particularly the final one against Slovenia, wasn't just a bad game. From a neutral point of view, it was a joy-sucking 90 minutes that you will never get back. I mean, Group C and Group E as a whole were remarkably low on drama and entertainment. Portugal's quarter-final defeat against France, featuring 2 out of the 4 pre-tournament favourites, was a crime against football, if not an international war crime. No one ought to have been surprised, given Roberto Martinez and Didier Deschamps' approaches to this tournament, and what both teams produced during the round of 16, but an eagerly anticipated game like that, between 2 big hitters in the knockout stage, with a big audience, they live long in the memory, for either good or bad. And, in this case, of course, very bad. The latter stages of tournaments also, invariably, tend to determine their legacies. This same conversation happened during the 2022 World Cup, following an alleged lack of entertainment in about half of the groups, but the final, the first 75 to 80 minutes of which, it must be said, also wasn't very interesting, had such a dramatic and climactic ending that is all that 90% of people will ever associate with that World Cup as a whole. Well, you know, that and all of the corpses, I suppose. Still, at least David Beckham did well out of it. Every cloud, eh, Becks? Where there is an even more conspicuous lack of star power at this Euros, it must be said, is in the dugouts. There has been a gradual but certain shift over the last couple of decades, where the international game, largely for financial reasons, but also just due to the less hands-on nature of the role and prestige, has become secondary, in the eyes of many coaches, to the club game. It used to be the case that the world's best managers wanted to manage their national teams and go to a Euros, Copa America or World Cup. Most of them probably still do, deep down, but the fact of the matter is that they aren't at the moment. Whereas at Euro 96, England were managed by Terry Venables, the Netherlands by Guus Hiddink, France by Aimé Jacquet, Germany by Bertie Vogts, and Italy by Arrigo Sacchi, all outstanding managers who could have walked into some of Europe's most high-profile club jobs. At Euro 2024, the calibre of head coaches has been severely diminished. That's not just in terms of their talent or reputation, or not even primarily in those terms, but in terms of what they bring to the tournament as a whole. The likes of Venables, Hiddink and Sacchi were, or are, very big characters who were often great value in press conferences and added to the narrative that surrounded games. How many managers can the average football fan even name at this Euros, assuming that they haven't watched my excellent video ranking them all on their playing abilities, let alone name what they have added or any memorable moments from them at this tournament? Continuing on the theme of things that have actually changed, it's not just because you're getting old and miserable, football has become more tactical, methodical, and, in some senses, predictable in recent years. The emphasis now, unless you are Carlo Ancelotti, in which case you just use wizardry and great players, is almost always on control. How can we get it? How can we retain it? And how can we reduce the amount of chaos in a game at all times? If we are simplifying things, we can call this the peppification of football, but he is now just one of a whole raft of managers attempting, with varying degrees of success, to do the same thing. Of course, reducing chaos is good for Guardiola because his teams tend to have very good players and extremely well-defined roles, meaning that, all being well, in a game with less chaos, they will win the vast majority of matches. Reducing chaos is less good, arguably, for football fans who, let's face it, at least when it isn't punishing their own teams, love a bit of chaos. People aren't wrong to have noticed this shift within football. It has been acknowledged and criticised by some of the game's greatest thinkers, including, very recently, Uruguay boss Marcelo Bielsa, along with the likes of Cesc Fabregas, the Brazilian Ronaldo, and of course, our old friend Michael Owen. Bielsa's most memorable soundbite was the claim that there are becoming, quote, fewer footballers worth watching. This is a sense that a lot of football fans have. I have made 2 videos exploring this topic in the past, one a good while ago about the absence of flair players in the modern game compared to 20 years ago when I first got into football, and one about the broader question of whether football, particularly tactically and from an entertainment perspective, really has got worse. So I am reluctant to tread upon too much old ground, but footballers, inarguably, have become more robotic. It's not just at the senior level that this happens, when the stakes become higher for everyone involved, forcing players and managers to become more risk-averse and conservative. It is actually drilled into them now, almost from the very beginning. As I covered in the second of those 2 videos that I just mentioned, academy players are coached, or overcoached if you like, into being more risk-averse, with the efficiency of their play prioritised above almost anything else. There is another significant and legitimate reason, I think, why this Euros, and indeed the last 2 Euros as well, have felt historically unsatisfying, and that is the format itself. Again, I have talked about this in the past, most notably in a video about the 2026 World Cup, which makes this problem even worse, but tournament football has been devalued by the constant pursuit of greater revenue. The way to generate more revenue is simply to have more teams and play more matches, which is why the Euros has gone from being a 16 to a 2014 tournament. The problem isn't actually the expansion in of itself, even if you could argue that it slightly waters down the quality of the teams at the Euros, but rather, as with the World Cup, it is the format change which has accompanied it. Because the overall number of teams no longer allows for 2 teams to progress from each group of 4, we end up in the ludicrous situation where the third place team from 4 out of the 6 groups still progress. At Euro 2016, Portugal progressed from their group in third despite failing to win a single group game and went on to win the Euros. Meanwhile, Slovenia made it through to the knockout stage of this Euros, again, without winning a single game. Look, it's just rubbish. Tournament football is supposed to be all about jeopardy. In a 2-team progression system, rather than 3, the likes of France, the Netherlands, and even England would have gone into their final group games with a real risk of getting knocked out. Of course, from an English perspective, I wouldn't want England to be knocked out, but clearly, that degree of jeopardy, of it all still being to play for, makes for a better spectacle and a more entertaining group stage. What we actually get, under the current format, is a situation where the top teams know that they can muddle through to the knockout stage without doing all that much during the group stages, instead conserving their energy and attempting to turn on the style when it really matters. If you ask many of the players themselves at Euro 2024, they'll tell you that if there has been a reduction in quality or entertainment, it has less to do with the tactics, the tournament's format, or even some of the terrible pitches here in Germany, most notably in Frankfurt, and more to do with tiredness and the sheer amount of football that they've played. Again, this is hardly a new criticism, and it's another one that I have explored in depth in a video dedicated solely to it, but Euro 2024, unlike the 2022 World Cup, which was of course played during the winter, comes at the end of a long, hard season. When we talk about the lack of star power, it's not just that there are fewer individual superstars in the modern game, although there are, it's also that those star players, like Kane, Lewandowski, and Mbappe, are either exhausted, playing through knocks, niggles, and injuries, or both of the above. Footballers could play 100 games a season. They could play a game every single day if you made them, but don't expect the quality of their football, their mental and physical agility, or their athleticism not to wane, and therefore the quality and entertainment of the football not to be watered down. The idea that we are seeing anything like the best from the best players at Euro 2024 is obviously absurd, and until people confront the problem of too much football, fatigue, and saturation even on the part of the viewer at this stage, that will continue to be a problem. In actual fact, what we are getting is a push in the direct opposite direction towards more games, more football, and more saturation. With all of that being said, I don't actually think that Euro 2024 has been that bad. It certainly hasn't been uniquely bad. As I said, Euro 96 was many orders of magnitude worse by almost any metric, other than maybe the weather, and I actually think Euro 2024 has probably been the best Euros, in terms of entertainment, at least since Euro 2012. That is not to dismiss all of the criticisms of it, and modern football as a whole, many of which are valid, it's just that, to some degree, for a lot of people, it's not the football that's changed, it's them. Maybe the 1998 World Cup was more enjoyable because it predated Pep, and the positional rigidity of many teams, the tactical ubiquity, and the slow build-up play. Or maybe it was just because I didn't have any kids yet, I was 3 stone lighter, and women still found me sexually attractive. Again, I am channeling my inner 50-something-year-old man, just so that we're absolutely clear. I don't have kids, I've lost about a stone living in Germany during this Euros, and I am still, I think we can all agree, profoundly sexually attractive. And if there is nothing else that you take from this video, on the cusp of the Euro 2024 final, then let it be that. That is it for today's video, but thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Obviously, I hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And of course, it goes without saying, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos that you might enjoy watching after this one. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Threads via the username at HITC Sevens on all three, should you wish to do so. And all of those links that I just mentioned, plus a whole lot more, should be down in the video description below. Cheers!